Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we will talk about the preparations underway for the construction of Ram Temple in Ayodhya. We will also talk about how the railways has been impacted during the lockdown and how it is now trying to cut its expenditure. But first, we talk about the economy. With the Indian economy continuing to slow down due to the lockdown, experts have been raising concerns about how it is going to fare in the coming months and how fast it is likely to recover. One particular concern is that there will be a growing number of non-performing assets or NPAs in the country. The concern that a number of firms and organizations that have borrowed money from banks would not be in a position to return it. This threat has been highlighted in RBI's financial stability report that was released last week. It was also talked about by two former RBI governors, including Raghuram Rajan. In this segment, Udit Misra, who writes on economy for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about the concerns around the rise of NPAs, how it will likely impact the economy, and what the government can do about it. Udit, last week we heard a lot about the threat of rising NPAs. We had the financial stability report come out, plus we also heard from previous RBI governors, about this problem. Could you first talk about the financial stability report and, talk about what is the significance of that report and what did it say about NPAs?
See, the financial stability report is something that the RBI comes out with twice every year. Once, I think, in June or July, and once in December. And the whole point of financial stability report is to essentially figure out what is the robustness of the financial system in the country. So basically, it will look at issues like what is the level of debt in the system, how are public sector enterprises doing, how indebted they are, private sector, what is happening to bank credit, what is the state of NPAs, what is happening to non-bank financial companies. So basically looks at the whole financial system and gives an update to everybody about the health of the financial system. And it also does in this whole process some stress tests. Basically says that, okay, if from this point the economy worsens by this degree, then what will happen to these variables like NPA, credit, offtake and stuff. And similarly puts together the report for the whole financial system. So it's a great report to read because twice every year it gives you a very good understanding of where do we stand as a financial system. So on the NPA front, what the FSR says is that even though our financial system as of now is sound, risks are pretty high across the board. So I mean global risks or macroeconomic risks or any of the institutional risks are pretty high. And on NPAs in particular, it says that while the gross NPAs, and they are expressed as a percentage of total loans that are forwarded, were only 8.5% at the end of March this year. But if you were to imagine different scenarios, stressful scenarios, or how things can possibly go wrong for the economy, then by March next year, this gross NPA number proportion could go up from 8.5 to 14.7%. And this 14.7% would be a 2-decade high. So we are looking at a scenario where, because the economy is going through a really tough time, the proportion of non-performing assets in the system with the banks will go up or are likely to go up in a very substantial manner.
So, in a situation like this, where you have these non performing assets rising when people can't pay back their loans, could you illustrate in what ways it affects the economy?
So, there are many, many different ways. One is obviously that if you have a lot of firms unable to pay back, then obviously those firms, first of all, go under. They have to shut shop because they are now bankrupt. They cannot be in business. That essentially means a lot of job losses, a lot of loss of productive capacity in the economy. So, you're talking about, say, over a 6-month, 8-month period. If we had strict rules and said, okay, if you're not able to pay up your loans, then we'll shut shop. will force you to stop producing. Then you'd see that over 8-month period, 6-month period, a lot of productive capacity would come down in the economy. So that is one. It also leads to job losses, as I mentioned. It leads to loss of business confidence. Businessmen, I mean, the whole animal spirits bit, that comes down. Then you also look at what happens to these NPAs are essentially the assets of the banks. And if they are not paid back, they are bad loans, then banks suffer. So the banks could go under, which means that either the government has to then recapitalize those banks because many of them are public sector banks, in which case that leads to a problem that where does the government get the money from? There's no free lunch here. So the government will have to then borrow money, especially in a downturn like currently where government doesn't have very good finances. It will have to then borrow money from some other source, which is likely to be RBI, and recapitalize the banks on the ground. But that process then leads to higher debts for the government, and that higher debt would eventually lead to perhaps more inflation in the economy. You also must understand that if banks increasingly find that their loans that they had extended are turning bad and they're turning into NPAs, then they also become far more risk averse, which is something that we've seen in the last few months, that banks have increasingly become risk averse. So even when RBI is providing them with lots of money at very cheap interest rates, banks are not extending them in terms of loans to the economy because they are very wary of extending a new loan when so many of the old loans have become into NPAs. So it becomes not just an immediate problem of job losses and loss of productive capacity, but it also becomes a sort of a structural constraint over time in terms of staging a recovery. So that's broadly what it is.
And faced with this kind of problem, especially when the economy is slowing down, what are the kind of things that the government can do about it?
So, see, if the NPAs were happening in one sector, then perhaps you could have a smart response, a very sector specific response. So, if, say, textile firms were struggling, then you could have possibly thought of textile sector specific solutions, and targeted whatever is leading to that NPAs being formed. But the current scenario is quite unique. The COVID induced disruption is not something that is sector specific. It's not even an economy specific thing. It's affecting every economy in the world. And because it's all happening at the same time, that creates a problem of resources. You could have thrown some money at a sector specific thing and resolved it. But if it's happening across the board, then there's just not enough money. So the first thing in the short term, the only thing that you could possibly do is throw some money. The government could have given some money to certain firms and said, okay, carry on doing your business, keep paying back your EMIs. But the problem here is that it's happening across the board and there's not enough money. The other thing is that in the medium to long term, what the government can possibly do is to ensure that businesses which are struggling or businesses that have gone down, entrepreneurs who have failed in this cycle of downturn, have the wherewithal, have the institutional and the ecosystem set up to come back into the game, that they can form new companies, stage a recovery quickly enough. There is a certain amount of pain that will have to be endured by everybody, and perhaps no one more than the firms that are likely to suffer the most. They will have to go through certain amount of pain, and some might have to go under. But what can possibly be done is to ensure that the institutional framework and the economic regulatory policy framework is such that when you are staging a recovery, it happens in a quicker manner. It doesn't become this long bureaucratic exercise to stage a recovery, make a new firm, get your logistical demands sorted, that kind of a thing.
And are there things that the RBI can do and deal with it differently from the way it has in the past?
The RBI has been doing a lot to essentially make more and more money available to the economy and make it available at less and less cost, basically lower interest rates. But there are again structural problems. There is no easy solution here. Why? Because many of the financiers, RBI doesn't directly lend to you and me. Many of the financiers, the intermediaries like the banks or NBFCs, they have already got stuck with high NPAs. And so that process will take its own time for those NPAs to be resolved, for that bad debt level to come down, and for banks to have the confidence again to take the money from RBI and give it to the private sector. So at the RBI level, again, it's been very innovative in trying to solve this, but there are no very easy solutions which can be implemented like immediately in a month or so. It will work with a certain amount of lag. As things stand, that's how it is.
Earlier this week, we also had the former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan speak about this. Could you talk about what he had to say about this matter?
So Raghuram Rajan was speaking in Mumbai and he was making a number of points. And one of the things he mentioned was that he gave a very good analogy that we have put our economy in a coma. And I think by that he meant that we've put moratoriums, we've given people the opportunity not to pay right now all their EMIs, and we are not recognizing anything as NPA right now because there's massive lockdown. But then he said that we should not expect that when the economy finally awakens, when the patient comes out of this coma, that everybody would get up and start walking and come back to life straight away. What he basically meant was that, again, referring to the non performing assets, he expected that because of the tough situation in the economy, that proportion is likely to rise. And we should not be kidding ourselves that just because we've given moratoriums, those numbers will not go up. So he was basically raising a red flag on that count.
Udit, we were earlier talking about the financial stability report. Now, in that, what kind of things did the respondents of that survey say about the recovery that the economy is expected to make going forward?
Right. So, in the financial stability report, as part of that, RBI also conducts a systemic risk survey. Now, this systemic risk survey was done in April and May this year, and it essentially is an exercise to capture the perception of the experts and people in the market and the experts monitoring the economy to understand what they make of the economy. And there is a chart in the financial stability report which shows what kind of a recovery, economic recovery, did the experts expect in April, May. And not a single one of them, and this is very crucial, not a single one of them expected a V shaped quick recovery for the Indian economy. Most of them expected, I think around 60 to 63% of them expected a U shaped recovery, which is a long period of recovery, right? So it takes several years. Some of them, around 10-15% of them, even expected an extended recession, which is called an L-shaped sort of recovery, as it were. It's an extended recession where you see not just a single year decline in total output, which is likely to happen this year, but perhaps a decline in the next year also, and so on. The point is that most of the experts who are not named in the survey do not expect a very quick recovery. Actually, nobody expects a quick recovery. And that has a huge bearing on the level of NPAs, because if the recovery is very slow or if there is an extended recession, between those two, the chances of NPAs increasing are higher. If it's a quick recovery, then you could perhaps survive by having a moratorium that, okay, don't pay for 3 months, 6 months, and then everything will be back to normal and you'll be able to pay back. But if nobody expects this to happen and if the economy actually continues struggling for a longer period, then NPAs will continue to pile up. And that has its own whole set of problems, from job losses to structural impediments to recovery.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about the Ram Temple. Back in November 2019, a 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court, while settling the decades-old Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid case, directed that the disputed site be handed over to a center-appointed trust for the construction of a temple and Muslims be given an alternate 5-acre site for a mosque. Now, the 5th of August has been decided as the day that the foundation stone of the new temple will be laid. That is, its Bhoomi Pujan will take place. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the Bhoomi Pujan at the site, and this will be telecast live by public broadcaster Doordarshan. In this segment, Maulshree Seth, who reports on political and social issues in Uttar Pradesh, joins us to talk about the preparations that are underway in the state and in Ayodhya, the city where the temple is being constructed.
A lot of preparations are being done by the government. Administration has been instructed as well. First of all, the CM itself has said that it would be like Diwali for 2 days, at least 4th and 5th. And all the temples as well as houses have been asked to light up diyas on both 5th as well as 4th. So apart from that, administration is painting all the temples. Rangolis are being made all across, the pictures of Ram and Rangolis. All these things are being done all across the city. So those are the preparations that are being done for that particular day. Apart from that, on particular day, Prime Minister is expected to arrive for the event, and he is likely to go to offer prayers at Hanuman Gadi first, and then he is likely to go to offer prayers at Ramlala. This is going to be his first visit, even though Ram Temple issue has been there on the agenda of BJP all along. But this would be the first visit of PM to actually to offer prayers at Ramlala. So that is also going to be significant. After that, what the saints are saying, as well as the trust members have informed, that the auspicious time is just for 32 seconds for the Bhoomi Pujan. So it would start at 12:15. So around that time, in between that time, the first stone of the construction has to be laid.
Considering the lockdown and the ongoing pandemic, authorities are ensuring that social distancing measures will take place. Though so far, a total of 200 people, including 150 invitees, have been allowed for the Bhoomi Pujan ceremony. The day, August 5, coincidentally will also mark 1 year of the abrogation of Article 370 and the bifurcation of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into 2 union territories. Both Article 370 and the Ram Temple have been 2 ideological issues close to the BJP. But Maulshree says that in the NDA's earlier avatar under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the BJP had been forced to place them on back burner due to coalition compulsions. But this has changed now. And with Yogi Adityanath as the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, who has been involved with the Ram Temple movement for years, the matter takes particular significance. And Yogi Adityanath's involvement has continued even now.
See, you can understand with the fact that for the construction of the temple at the site, the Ramlala idol was to be shifted. So it was Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath himself who had shifted, carrying the idol from the place where it was to a temporary temple which has been created till the time the actual temple would be created. So on March 15, he had actually carried that idol to the place amidst the chanting of mantras, and also so he had personally carried that idol himself.
But even apart from the construction of Ram Temple, the Yogi Adityanath government has also identified development projects for Ayodhya.
Chief Minister is saying that everybody is going to see it as a pride of the country. As well as in other nations, it would be seen in a different way because now the Ram Temple would be constructed there. So what the state government has planned to do is to lay foundation stone of development projects as well as inaugurate some of the development projects on August 5th, along with the start of the construction work of the temple. So the foundation stone of about 326 crore worth projects is going to be done on that particular day, as well as inauguration of roughly about 161 crore worth projects would be done on that particular day. Among the projects which would be inaugurated would include the recently concluded construction of Ramkila Ghat and several other projects, whereas foundation stone would be laid like expansion of Ramkatha Park, and there are several projects related to Ayodhya, including the road projects. And as far as 3-phase development plan is concerned, so that also includes widening of roads and health facilities, infrastructure, everything. So it's basically in 3 phases that government has planned the development of Ayodhya. And the state government has also underway to construct a grand statue, over a 200-meter tall statue of Ram in Ayodhya. So that project is also underway right now.
The idea is to boost religious tourism that the city has traditionally seen and which the pandemic has now affected. Tourists who used to number 60 to 70,000 a day have now been reduced to about 100. Maulshree says that the road development project has been initiated keeping this in mind. The city is also expecting to see an increase in tourism after the 5th of August. Though a question that is on the minds of many is whether the Bhoomi Pujan will mark the end of one of the most turbulent chapters in Indian politics, or does it make way for new insecurities? And in the end, we talk about the railways. During the COVID-19 pandemic, among the many organizations and systems that have been suffering is also the Indian Railways. During the lockdown, the railways, in an unprecedented way, had to shut down both its passenger and freight services completely.
It only partially began operating Shramik trains, which were followed by special trains.
That's Iram Siddique, a reporter from Mumbai.
Railway would earlier run around 12,000 mail express trains. They are now running only about 200 of them. That too are running with not more than 70% occupancy. So their earnings have been massively hit.
It is also important to note that the railway passenger service was already loss-making. It was its freight business, Iram points out, that would make money and would cross-subsidize the passenger service. But both these services have been terribly hit by the lockdown.
Their revenues dropped down by nearly 58%. So while last year Railway had earned about 1,75,000 crores, it dropped down by 58% by May. Besides, the freight operations have been considerably hit with their loadings even in items such as petroleum, coal, cement going down because of a lot of construction activities had been completely stopped and now they're partially picking up, which reflected on the loadings of the railway also and subsequently bringing down their earnings.
Now, as their revenues dropped, the railways issued several guidelines in an attempt to cut down costs, particularly to trim down allowances and salaries that account for a significant part of their expenditure. So as part of this, the Railway Board has urged officials to stop the use of a practice that dates back to the colonial era, the practice and the system of personal and dark messengers.
So now dark and personal messengers have been a part of the railways since it started operations in 1953 and in 1905 when the Railway Board was created, sort of as the apex body that would take all policy decisions. Back then, there was no internet and fax and emails as we know and use them today. These dark messengers were essentially assigned to convey all kind of government communication, letters that were issued, any policy decision. So they would carry these documents from a particular zone to the apex body, that is the Railway Board, and back and forth. And within the zones also, there were various divisions to which this communication was to be made, and they were used for that.
A dark messenger collects daily dispatches and letters and distributes it to various offices in the railways, often traveling across a particular state. But a personal messenger would be in charge of delivering confidential and secret documents that the railways needed hand-delivered to an officer, like a particular chart sheet or a service record of a particular officer.
So invariably, a personal messenger would travel from, say, Mumbai to Delhi or from Kerala to Delhi, and they would have to stay put there unless and until they got the required response and then come back. So that is the distance that these guys would travel. Sometimes these personal messengers were given the performance appraisal forms. So in railways, usually the officers get transferred and after that, they have to fill in the appraisal form by their superiors. So these forms, because they were important and pertaining to the service record of a particular officer, they were usually hand-delivered by a personal messenger to that relevant officer. So he might just travel from one part of the country to wherever that officer has gotten transferred.
For this purpose, they would get daily and travel allowances. Some messengers would end up traveling for up to 20 days, and those allowances would pile up.
According to railway figures, railway spends about roughly 2,000 crore rupees for various allowances. That includes the staff allowance and the officers, the various allowances that the officers get, it is estimated that with 5,000 dark messengers and another 5,000 personal messengers, railway approximately spends around 10 to 12 crore rupees on them. This is over and above their salaries, just on their allowances that they would get.
Iram says that for the past 5 years, the railways has been trying to bring down the use of these dark and personal messengers and trying to implement the use of e-darks. But the need to deliver confidential documents and the reluctance to adopt new technology has kept the system going for over 160 years.
So even when there's a lot of impetus to modernize things and have e-offices, they yet depend on the file systems wherein, there's nothing replacing that dotted line where you see a signature with an ink to, a digital signature. So I can say that the system has been very slow in adopting this new form of technology. So even when fax and internet was introduced in the 80s, the dark system was heavily relied on. There was sort of no push to let go of these people, and they tend to depend on them over technology.
Another possible reason that this system continued was that often dark messengers were sent at the pretext of some official work, but would end up running personal errands for officers and would then draw allowances from the railways for it.
So railway has been trying to curb that practice. So this was when COVID happened and their revenues drastically went down. They started looking for ways in which they can reduce their expenditure, and they wanted to do this. They've been trying to do this, like let go of this colonial culture that has been a part of, where a particular officer has a lot of servants. They would be used as bungalow peons and things like that. So that was one of the reasons that they wanted to cut this down.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.